Am I safe sleeping next to him? Murder victim's words expose husband is live now on woodtv.com. Target 8 investigator Susan Samples takes a look at the story behind Kentwood's Richard Guccilar when he strangled his wife, Amber. You can find that link to that story attached to the stream here if you're viewing on Facebook right now. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm News 8 digital anchor Luke Laster here from the Wood TV live desk. In light of this story, we welcome two domestic violence experts to the live desk today. Holly Wilson and Zenaida Jimenez of Safe Haven Ministries in Grand Rapids here to shed some light on what you can do if you're facing domestic violence. Holly, Zenaida, good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
Before we get rolling here, if the both of you could please just introduce yourselves and tell us the specific roles that you have with Safe Haven Ministries. Holly, the floor is yours.
Certainly. My name is Holly Wilson. I am the Director of Client Services at Safe Haven Ministries. I have been a domestic violence advocate and therapist, and now oversee our direct service programming at Safe Haven.
Excellent. Zenaida.
Hi, I am Zenaida Jimenez. I am the Director of Housing Services at Safe Haven Ministries. So I oversee our emergency safe shelter and oversee our staff who help connect families to housing after emergency safe shelter.
So this topic, obviously a tough one to speak on, but I'm not going to focus so much specifically on the story of Richard and Amber Guccilar, but more so on a general scale of recognizing, combating, and identifying domestic violence there. So Holly, we'll start with you. If you suspect that someone may be a victim of domestic violence, what kind of behavior are they displaying to you that is leading you to that suspicion?
Yeah, this is so tricky because, oftentimes people may not know that somebody is experiencing domestic violence in their relationship. Some of those signs, I think just any significant changes in their normal behavior. Individuals who seem to be more conscious of timeliness and how quickly they have to respond to their partner. Are they disengaging from social situations that they would normally have been in? Sometimes the unexplained scratches or bruising, you're really looking for just some of those more general characteristics. I think too, survivors will often tend to throw out bits of information about their relationship that they might be concerned about, describing their partners as, they got super angry, that, being a little bit fearful of that anger, and sometimes just testing the waters to see, how are people going to respond to that. So if somebody suspects a family member or a friend, just approaching that conversation really non-judgmentally and carefully, just saying, hey, I have some concerns, or hey, I noticed this thing in your relationship or this change in your behavior, can we talk about that? Being able to be equipped with where you can direct somebody, not blaming the individual, not vilifying their partner too. I think that's often a piece that survivors are really concerned about, the reputation of their partner, and so not making them out to be the bad person. So really just having that conversation. Hey, I'm really concerned about this. I know some people that you can talk to. I think that's why we have conversations like this, so that people are equipped with where can we refer somebody to if we suspect that they're in an unhealthy relationship.
More often than not, individuals won't leave the relationship, and you, as an outsider, sometimes the question may come to mind is, well, why don't you just leave? And that could be a dangerous question to ask, and kind of one that needs a little more explanation. What would you say to that one?
Yeah, it is a dangerous question. It's dangerous and it's a loaded question, and I think it's hard to understand if you've never been in that situation, right? I was reading through some of the comments on your story yesterday, and there were some survivors giving really, really great comments, just shedding a little bit of light of some of the reasons that survivors stay. At the core of that, right, it's fear, but it's a spectrum of things. It's, really having love for that partner. There's children involved oftentimes, wanting to see the good in that individual, wanting others to see the good in that individual. And threats, right? Threats of leaving, especially when children are involved. It's not always safe. In fact, it's rarely safe for survivors of domestic violence to leave those relationships. There's pressure involved, pressure from family, cultural pressure, spiritual pressures. There's a lot of barriers involved when individuals are trying to prepare to leave or thinking about what's next. It's not as easy as let's pack a bag and, go somewhere. There's often not times that there's somewhere to go. They might not have support from friends or family. They might not have the financial support to be able to just pack up and go. It's a really loaded question. There's a lot of things that are involved with leaving. And so that's some of the support that Safe Haven provides, is helping to safety plan for individuals who are ready and who want to leave that situation. We can do that safety planning. We can help prepare them so that they can do that safely. And sometimes that's not always the case, right? Sometimes there's not a lot of preparation. It's just, I have to get out. I have to get my children out right now, and we'll figure out those next steps later. But it's a very loaded question. There's a lot of different reasons, and it's different for everybody.
You mentioned cultural pressure. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, there's a lot of cultures that believe that individuals should stay together, should stay married, especially when there are children involved, that believe that, the abuse isn't that bad, and that someone should stay and, endure that and work through that, right? Maybe go to couples therapy. We hear that a lot. And that's just not always what's best for survivors.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that another layer to that too that we often see is there's that myth that if somebody just leaves, the abuse is going to stop, right? And we know, the vast majority of survivors that we work with, that abuse does not stop just because somebody has left the relationship. And so there's ongoing power and control tactics that are being used even after somebody's left that relationship.
Yeah, and to speak to that, Holly's absolutely right. A lot of times the violence increases, right, when somebody tries to leave. So you might see someone in a abusive relationship, and you might not know that they've tried to leave in the past and it didn't work out, and they returned just to keep a little bit of that safety, because like I said, the violence can often increase when individuals leave, and when children are involved, sometimes survivors, find it best at that moment to return, and it might take many times for that individual to attempt to leave before they're successful. And like Holly said, that doesn't mean that the violence and abuse ends there.
You've both mentioned now children being involved, who often can get caught, for lack of a better word, in the crossfire of an abusive relationship. What would you tell a parent who has a couple of kids, or even just one kid, looking to get out and looking to get some resources, and maybe not just for themselves, but for their children who may be involved in some kind of domestic abuse situation?
Yeah, I think that's the beauty of programs like Safe Haven. Being able to connect with an advocate and really have survivors be able to talk through their unique situation. That's going to be different, different advice or different guidance, different discussion for every survivor that walks through our doors and where kids are involved. For some individuals, making that safe plan of leaving, having all the pieces in place so that they can leave successfully. I've certainly worked with a number of survivors where they felt like they were the buffer between that abuse, affecting their kids. And so leaving and knowing that, the abusive parent was likely going to have unsupervised visitation with their children, that was more of a risk than somebody staying in that relationship and being able to play that in between. So I, connect with advocates that are in this work who understand that situation, understand the complexity, can approach that from a non-judgmental space, right? Because a lot of even well-meaning family and friends may not understand the complexity of what that may look like.
Yeah. And the other part of that, I would say, yeah, absolutely. Friends and family might not always understand, but if you have a strong support system, natural supports of friends and family, utilize them as much as possible, because oftentimes survivors think that, they're protecting their children from the violence, and more times than not, the children are aware of what's going on. They might not witness it with their own eyes, but they most likely always know that something's going on. So starting to build that support system, whether it's formal services like Safe Haven, the YWCA, or your natural supports as well.
So I have a question. After looking at some of the just information on your website there, law enforcement, it seems like they can only do so much in situations like this. Say you're in a situation where you've gone to law enforcement, but it keeps persisting, and where would you advise someone to go if there's a situation where they go to law enforcement, maybe someone goes and gets their bond paid, then they're back out, maybe they're looking for some kind of revenge? What would you tell those people in terms of looking to law enforcement?
Another complex piece, of that support, that community support for survivors. We know it's such an integral piece that victims not be the only ones responsible for ensuring their own safety when they're in a domestic violence relationship. It does take a community. And sometimes, we do hear from survivors that law enforcement, you're right, sometimes there's only so much they can do, or the offender, flees and, aren't able to be found, or if they are arrested, they're, oftentimes released pretty quickly. We do at Safe Haven have an emergency safe shelter. Somebody is experiencing safety concerns and needs to get somebody someplace safe quickly. Contacting a domestic violence agency and exploring what those safe options are. And again, it's really individualized. For some individuals, getting a personal protection order can be a layer of protection. But we also know it's only as good as the piece of paper it's written on, right? For some, that is not going to be an option. It might escalate their abusers' tactics. Enforcing that can be really difficult. Again, that responsibility is really heavy on a victim to enforce that PPO and any violations that occur. So again, working with domestic violence advocates who can walk alongside of you in that process, able to provide that individualized guidance can be incredibly helpful.
So one thing that we do have here as a feature on our Facebook page is questions from viewers. So we do have one here that I'm going to put up. This one from Paul Thompson. Should be able to come up on the screen there. He says, where does a man go when the woman is assaulting the man, and when the police just tell the man to leave, but the fear of having no idea where to go, where is the man to go?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm glad that you brought that up. Most domestic violence agencies also serve men. They don't discriminate based on sex and gender. So both Safe Haven Ministries and the YWCA here in Kent County can serve men as well who are experiencing domestic violence. That just leave response, I think, is pretty universal from a lot of our community members. Just get out, they minimize it. Again, connect with our agency, contact our hotline, text our hotline, or present even as a walk-in. You don't have to have business hours, and we are ready to respond even for individuals that are not female identified.
Paul, thank you for taking the time to watch and to ask that question. Holly, thank you for answering that. So moving forward now, how does the system need to change just to better support survivors?
Yeah, I think Holly can speak to some of the work that she's been a part of through the DVCCRT.
Yeah, so Safe Haven got to be a part of a domestic violence homicide review, and part of that we were able to put together some recommendations for some pretty key systemic actors in our community. We really identified systems having good training and education around, the complex nuances and dynamics of domestic violence. I think one area where, a community as a whole can improve is just believing survivors. This is happening. It's very real. The fear is real. The safety concerns are real. And again, we kind of spoke to it earlier, but, at the point somebody is planning to leave an abusive relationship is the most dangerous time for them. So when they're sharing information about those safety concerns that they're experiencing, the threats that they're hearing from the abuser, taking that seriously. And I think that's one step. But also being open to inviting, Safe Haven in to do some comprehensive training. And that's across the board, that's with judges and our courts and law enforcement and our hospitals, being able to recognize it when it's happening. What are those red flags that we're seeing? And better supporting individuals who are trying to get out. I mean, I think that's just so tragic. I mean, even in our own community, survivors are doing exactly what society tells them to do, get out. And at the point they're getting out is when they're being murdered or kids are being harmed. So I think we have a better opportunity. I think there's just a lot of opportunity to support survivors in that. Anything you would add?
No, that's great.
What's the number one myth surrounding domestic violence?
Probably part of what we spoke to already, just that, if they just got out, that, the violence would end. And so I think we made that point. I think some other common myths are that it doesn't happen very often. Statistically, 1 in 4 individuals are experiencing some form of domestic violence. That's even greater for our youth who are experiencing dating violence. This is every single community, every single workplace, every single church has domestic violence victims and survivors that they're interacting with. So it is common. This is something that is a huge concern for our community.
What would you say the number one mistake people make when trying to help a survivor is?
Yeah, I think we've spoke to that a little bit as well. Pushing that individual to leave and making it seem like it's an easy decision. Survivors know when they're not safe, and they often want to leave. And so pushing somebody but not providing the support of what's next, what does that look like, and not having a real understanding of the fear, the potential for increased abuse can be really harmful when you're trying to be supportive to an individual.
I would echo that. I think well-meaning friends and family oftentimes just are like, oh my gosh, you need to get out right now. I'll pay for a hotel for the weekend. And that's okay in the immediate, but oftentimes then survivors are having to go back into that abusive relationship. And we know that the number of times that individuals have to go back, the greater opportunity, escalation occurs. And so, ideally this is something that individuals can connect with advocates around and make that safe plan to leave, address those barriers ahead of time, and not having to, figure out, okay, how am I going to afford living on my own if I've not been allowed to work or maintain employment? What about childcare? Isolation is such a huge piece of abusive relationships, and so having all those buffers in place take a long time to address sometimes.
The both of you have rang off a few statistics along this stream here, but in terms of prevalence of domestic violence and related homicides right now here in history, if it's increasing, what might some of those statistics look like? If not, obviously we'll move on. But is there any increasing statistics there?
I think I'm remembering from even the press conference around the domestic violence homicide recommendation our prosecutor had mentioned that, domestic violence homicides in Kent County were increasing. We've even seen, I think COVID really brought to light a lot of this issue. We started to hear a lot about, the increase in domestic violence. And so, I think we are seeing that. I don't know that there's an actual increase or if we're just talking about it more. I know even at our agency, the intensity of some of the individuals we're working with has been more complex. People are dying in our community. And we've seen a lot of that over the past year.
Something else we want to hit on here, tethers for abusers. Are you able to elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, I don't see it happen very often, so I'm not as familiar with, what the determination is. Where does it rise to the level of a tether for an abuser?
Can you explain that? What that is?
A tether?
Just that.
Or
yeah.
Yeah. I know it just doesn't. It's not a common accountability issue for abusers.
Gotcha.
Do you know?
Yeah, so in the cases that I've seen a tether used, so it's a tracking device, right? And there's often another crime involved. It's not, the individual's not wearing a tether because of the domestic violence. It's often they've been released from prison and now they're on parole, and so their parole officer has access to their location, and they might be restrained to just their home or a small area, but like Holly said, it's not often that happens, and it's not, again, also very effective, right? Because it's reactive when an individual might approach their victim with that tether on. Again, calling the police in that moment, but it's reactive, and so it often isn't effective and not very common for just domestic violence.
A first-time domestic violence case is a misdemeanor. Do you think that should change?
I think accountability needs to change overall. There are some pretty hard and fast rules around, misdemeanors and felonies. Certainly I think as advocates, we'd like to see more accountability for individuals who choose to use violence in their intimate partner relationship. Again, it's not uncommon even if it rises to the level, and I think that threshold is pretty significant for somebody to be arrested for domestic violence. But even in that case, they're often released within 24 hours. So even that, for a victim or survivor to be able to make that plan quickly to get someplace safe, oftentimes just doesn't even allow for that opportunity before their abuser is already back.
If there's someone, kind of in closing here, if there's someone listening to this stream right now who may be a victim of domestic abuse, what would you tell them?
Reach out to safe places to get some support. It's hard to call a hotline or to reach out to a stranger, and I get that. Just know that domestic violence agencies like Safe Haven, we are ready to walk alongside of you and non-judgmentally. Come on in and just connect with an advocate and get some of that support. I think a myth, I think a concern that some survivors have is that, well, if I go in, they're just going to tell me that I need to leave. We're not going to do that. We recognize that, victims and survivors are the expert of their own lives. And we really are just there to support you. And again, walk alongside of you in that journey and figuring out what those next steps looks like. And maybe it's doing some physical safety planning, maybe it's some emotional safety planning. How can you even stay in that relationship temporarily or for the time being, and do some of that emotional protection for yourself. Anything you would add?
Yeah, I agree. And if someone's not ready to reach out to a formal service like Safe Haven or the YWCA, find someone that you do trust. Find someone that you're able to share some of your experience with, somebody that might be willing to help you and able to help you, because not everyone's always ready to reach out to a service like Safe Haven or the YWCA, but find a trusted individual and talk to them so that someone's aware of what's going on and so that someone can help plan those next steps with you.
I think, yeah, just to add another layer of that, and we certainly saw that in with Amber, is, you know, she was documenting some of the experiences that she had. You know, she may not have been in that place where she was ready to reach out or even know where to go. I have no idea, but that's oftentimes, you know, part of that safety plan for survivors is, you know, document that. You know, even sometimes abusers can be really good at that gaslighting and psychological abuse, and so even you know, writing that down and being able to refer back to that can be helpful, even just to eliminate some of that crazy making. And again, you know, as I say that, you know, safety planning around that, you know, making sure that if you are writing it down, is there a safe place to put that? Is that going to be something that an abuser is able to find, and then maybe that's not, you know, not going to be an option.
Ladies, anything else that you would like to add? If not, no big deal. I just like to ask.
No, I just want to say thank you for all of your reports that you've put out. I've seen a lot of traction on your articles and a lot of survivors speaking up and encouraging others to reach out for help or just, you know, helping to affirm and not victim blame. So we appreciate having these conversations and the reporting that you all have done.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Target 8 investigator Susan Samples, Am I Safe Sleeping Next to Him? Murder Victim's Words Expose Husband, live now on woodtv.com. That is attached to the stream here if you're viewing on Facebook. This has been a look at the Wood TV Live Desk. I'm News 8 digital anchor Luke Laster. We'll see you around, folks. Have a good one.